9. Johnny and Michelle Damon. In early 2021, police pulled over a suspected drunk driver in Windermere, Florida. Behind the wheel, they found former New York Yankees outfielder Johnny Damon, who, according to a police report, was unsteady on his feet and his speech was extremely slurred. Body cam footage showed the 47-year-old and his wife Michelle Mangan Damon telling officers that they lived just 200 yards away and expressing their support for the Blue Lives Matter pro-police movement. At some point, Michelle became uncooperative. She refused to get into a squad car and told an officer not to effing touch her when he tried physically guiding her toward the vehicle. In the meantime, Johnny commented that his wife fights all the time and that she's crazy. But his behavior was no less embarrassing than Michelle's, as he devolved into allegations that the cops targeted the couple for being Trump supporters. An officer clarified that his reasons for pulling the Damons over had nothing to do with their political beliefs and everything to do with how Johnny was driving, but he continued to insist otherwise. He performed poorly in field sobriety tests and his blood alcohol level tested at 0.3, nearly 4 times the legal limit for driving in Florida. Michelle was charged with battery on an officer and resisting with violence, and Johnny was charged with DUI. He struck a deal with prosecutors and entered a pre-trial diversion program that would eventually see the case dropped if he stayed out of trouble for a certain amount of time, performed community service, and donated to charity. 8. Brook, Cruz, and William Hone. In 2016, 22-year-old Savannah Graywind was just weeks away from giving birth when she vanished from her family's apartment building in Fargo, North Dakota. She went to visit a neighboring apartment for a few minutes, but never returned home to eat the freshly delivered pizza she'd ordered. The neighbor, Brook Cruz, told detectives that Savannah had left her apartment and that she didn't know anything about her disappearance. But they remained suspicious, and during one of several return visits to her apartment, they discovered a newborn baby. Cruz claimed that Savannah had returned to her apartment hours after she initially went missing, dropped the infant off without explanation, and vanished again. A few days later, Savannah's body was found in a river, bearing clear evidence that someone had cut her open and removed her baby, and that she'd suffered a particularly violent death. Cruz's live-in boyfriend, William Hone, told investigators he'd come home from work to find the bathroom covered in blood and Graywind near death. DNA tests proved that the infant was Savannah's, and Cruz and Hone were charged in connection with her murder. In court, Cruz admitted to concocting a fake pregnancy with plans to somehow get her hands on someone's baby and pass it off as her own. She said Hone had been pressuring her for kids, and she thought it was the only way to keep him in the relationship. Hone said he knew nothing about his girlfriend's plot to murder Savannah, but he admitted to lying to investigators about his knowledge of the crime. Cruz was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and Hone is serving a 20-year sentence. 7. Joseph and Erin Myers. Small business owner Joseph Myers met his wife Erin online, married her abroad, and moved her from the Philippines to his rural community in Wayland, New York. At some point, he found himself wanting to expand his business pursuits. Myers wanted to buy a tow truck company, but he couldn't afford it. Erin wanted to relocate some of her family members to the US, which is also very expensive. The couple began brainstorming ways to come up with enough money to fund their pursuits and narrowed their sights on 60-year-old David Odell. He was a childhood friend of Joe's who suffered intellectual setbacks from a head injury sustained in an accident years earlier. Odell worked part-time for Myers, and Erin acted as his caretaker. Due to his vulnerabilities, Erin and Joe saw Odell as an easy target. In 2015, Erin convinced Odell to deed his home to her. She took out a $60,000 insurance policy on the property, a $40,000 life insurance policy on Odell with herself as the sole beneficiary, and a $45,000 renter's insurance policy on some of her belongings that were being kept at the property. By then, Erin had already tried to kill Odell by taking away his medication, which she and Joe believed would cause him to have a fatal seizure. The plan failed, so the couple resorted to Plan B in early 2016. Surveillance footage shows Erin removing her belongings from Odell's property shortly before Joseph walked over there with a torch. Minutes later, the house erupted into flames with Odell trapped inside. He burned to death. It wasn't long before investigators discovered evidence that the Myers were responsible for the crime and arrested them on suspicion of killing Odell. Both Joe and Erin were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 23 years to life. 6. Austin and Kathleen Bhutan. In 2017, 63-year-old Mitchell Ingle was robbed and murdered inside his trailer home in Golden, Colorado. The killer had fled the scene in the victim's pickup truck. A few days later, 23-year-old Chen Wei Guo was shot dead during an attempted carjacking in Utah. Detectives connected homeless couple Austin and Kathleen Bhutan to both murders. They learned that the pair were living under a bridge when Ingle invited them to his trailer to drink and smoke pot. At some point during the night, Ingle allegedly made some inappropriate comments to Kathleen. Feeling disrespected, Austin shot Ingle with a crossbow and cut his throat. Once the couple arrived in Utah, they began looking for another victim to rob and kill. Kathleen reportedly became impatient and started calling Austin a coward. After a brief argument, Austin killed Chen Wei Guo. The Bhutans were tried for the murders in both Utah and Colorado. Austin was sentenced to life without parole, while Kathleen received a 1-year sentence in Utah for receiving stolen property and a 16-year sentence in Colorado in connection with Ingle's murder. 5. Robert and Tiffany Williams. When Montoursville, Pennsylvania couple Robert and Tiffany Williams woke up one day in 2019 to find $120,000 in their bank account, they knew it was probably deposited by mistake. But instead of calling the bank to get to the bottom of the matter, they allegedly went on a spending spree, buying a camper and 2 vehicles. The pair also used some of the money to help out friends in need, which would have been an admirable act of kindness if the couple had used their own money for it. In the meantime, the bank realized that the money had gone to the Williams' account rather than the small business it was intended for due to a teller error. The institution sent the money to the proper recipient and told Tiffany Williams that she and Robert were responsible for returning the full amount of the mistaken deposit. By then, they'd spent more than $100,000. According to local station WNEP, Tiffany told the bank she would speak with her husband and work out a repayment plan. But she stopped communicating at some point, and authorities charged the couple with felony theft and receiving stolen property. Robert and Tiffany both admitted to knowing that the money didn't belong to them and spending it anyway. They were each sentenced to 7 years of probation and ordered to perform 100 hours of community service. 4. Mark and Patricia McCloskey. In the months following the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer in 2020, protests demanding justice and racial equality broke out across the U.S. In St. Louis, Missouri, activists attempted to walk to the home of Mayor Lyda Cruz, where they planned to express their disapproval of Cruz's response to a movement to defund the police. Just moments after they entered the affluent gated community, lawyers Mark and Patricia McCloskey burst out of their residence with an AR-15 and a handgun and pointed them at the demonstrators. A video of the confrontation shows Mark McCloskey yelling that the crowd was on private property and ordering them to leave. The interaction became even more heated as the couple exchanged words with the group, but luckily no shots were fired and nobody was injured. Footage of the encounter quickly went viral and generated mixed reactions, with some supporting the McCloskeys as alarmed homeowners who were rightfully defending their property, while others accused the pair of needlessly harassing peaceful protesters. A few weeks later, the McCloskeys were each charged with 1 felony count of unlawful use of a weapon, which carries a maximum 4-year prison term and a fine of up to $10,000. Mark McCloskey pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault, and Patricia pleaded guilty to harassment. Missouri Governor Mike Parson pardoned the couple in 2021. 3. Denise and Mohammed Tor. In 2016, a young woman named Jana Diallo told authorities that a couple had enslaved her for 16 years at their home in Southlake, Texas. She just escaped with help from neighbors and didn't even know her age. After arriving in Texas from the African nation of Guinea as a young girl in 2000, Diallo lived with Mohammed Tor and Denise Cross Tor, who both came from prominent families in Guinea and were members of the country's elite class. The couple would later claim that they brought Diallo into their home to give her a better life than she would have had in Guinea, where she lived in a thatched hut with no electricity, but the young woman's account of her childhood was nothing short of horrific. She said that tours kept her out of school and forced her to cook, clean, and care for their children with no pay. Diallo also recalled being beaten, sometimes with a belt or an electrical cord, being called a dog and other degrading names, and forced to sleep outside on a park bench as punishment. The Tours denied the allegations, but were ultimately convicted of forced labor and several other charges. They were each sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and will be deported to Guinea after serving their time. 2. Martin and Jolene LaFrance. In 2018, sheriff's deputies in Cayuga County, New York received a tip that a couple living in Port Byron had faked their son's cancer to get donations and other perks, including an opportunity to meet the child's favorite football team. During a 4-month investigation, detectives discovered that the little boy never had Hodgkin's lymphoma as his parents claimed, and that they swindled over $3,000 from donors through a fraudulent online crowdfunding campaign. When the couple took their allegedly ailing son to meet the Syracuse Orange football team, a relative told Syracuse.com that the boy's condition unfortunately wasn't improving. He said that the youngster was in stage 3 of his lymphoma and had undergone surgery as well as radiation and chemotherapy. The family member also claimed that a new tumor had recently been discovered in the child's abdomen. It's unclear whether the relative was party to the scheme or a victim of it. Authorities charged Martin and Jolene each with 1 felony count of scheme to defraud. The case was still ongoing a few months later when the pair took fentanyl in the presence of their child. Emergency responders arrived to find Jolene unresponsive in the lawn and administered Narcan. After the incident, the couple faced additional charges for endangering the welfare of a child. They were each sentenced to 5 years of probation and ordered to repay the ill-gotten funds. 1. Jon and Janice Land. While serving a warrant in an unrelated case at a Rockville, Maryland home in 2014, Montgomery County police discovered that the basement door had an external deadbolt. They entered and found 2 young men on a comforter on the bare tile floor. There was no other furniture in the room and no working lights, and the basement's bathroom was padlocked from the outside. The homeowners, Jon and Janice Land, identified the men as their 22-year-old autistic twin sons. They allegedly admitted to locking the pair in the basement every night due to their tendency to wander off from the property and because one of the men had damaged another part of the house. The brothers were typically locked in at around 10 o'clock every night and let out when their father woke up around 5 o'clock in the morning. Records show that the couple described their sons as being nonverbal and dependent on them for their everyday needs. In a statement to detectives, Jon Land said that he and Janice had recently removed furniture from the basement because it was soiled, and that they planned to buy new furniture as soon as they could afford it. Jon and Janice were charged with 2 counts of abuse of a vulnerable adult and 2 counts of false imprisonment, but prosecutors dropped the charges after determining that the twins' living conditions were unacceptable but not necessarily criminal. In deciding to dismiss the case, authorities also considered how the Lands were struggling to meet their son's needs after devoting their lives to caring for them. Instead of punishing them, social services stepped in and helped the couple find an appropriate home for the brothers, where they would get the care they needed and could still see their parents regularly. Would you rather be accused of participating in crimes your partner committed behind your back, or discover that your partner has a concerning history of convictions for violent crimes that they've never told you about? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.